Number one last week was this: pay attention to the tension. 3 people, yes. All right, pay attention to the tension. Pay attention to the tension. That's this. Whenever you're considering any business option, any choice, any situation, any circumstance in your life, any decision that's worth making, before making that decision, pay attention to the tension. There's something that dings your conscience, that kind of wakes you up and says, maybe you should pause on this. Pay attention to that tension before making a decision. Because we've all, right? Come on. Like me and like you, we've all made decisions that undermine our future, undermine our relationships, undermine our life. And as a result, it undermines everything that we impact and touch. And so it's important that we pay attention to the tensions, because you say this, I say this, we say this all the time. There's things that I would never do, right? You say to yourself, I would never do that. I would never do that. But what oftentimes, like I shared last week, right, and like you have been a part of and I've been a part of, we've all participated in 100% of all of our bad decisions, right? You were the mastermind. I'm picking on you a little bit, but I'm picking on me too. I was the mastermind on all my bad decisions. And so it's important that we pay attention to the tension, because every single bad decision is always the first step toward a bad habit, right? Every habit, if you go back to your bad habits, always go back to a first step, because every habit begins with a first step. Right? Every journey begins with the first step, and every pattern begins with the first line. And so it's important that we pay attention to the tension. That was last week. This week, we're picking it up with habit number 2. I'm going to give it to you, and everyone jump in. Habit number 2 is this: pay attention to your narratives. Pay attention to your narratives. Come on, I want us all to say out loud, even if you're watching on Story Kids on YouTube later, okay? All of us out loud together. Come on. Pay attention. Pay attention to your narratives. And just so we're on the same page when it comes to narratives, I'm just going to take you back in time just a little bit, okay? Some of you are in the room, you're probably there already. But take you back in high school, okay? Remember in high school when you were in high school, and I want you to think about your internal narrative as it relates to your parents, okay? Remember how dumb they were? Remember how uncool they were? Remember they just didn't get it, right? And you got into your 30s, and then you look back and you think to yourself, they were smarter than I thought they were, right? And really, you didn't wait till your 30s. In your 20s, you start to realize, oh my gosh, my parents got smarter all of a sudden, right? And maybe think about in relation to your narrative, in relation to high school, right? Maybe what your concept was, your perspective was of high school, of middle school. Such a waste of time, such a waste of time, such a waste of time, right? Such a waste of time. And maybe it was such a waste of time, you were young enough that you had a cell phone that your parents bought you. And you were sitting in class, and you were texting on your several $100 device, texting your friends that your loser parents bought for you. And you were saying to them, school is such a waste of time, school is such a waste of time, school is such a waste of time, right? Right? And it didn't occur to you that as you were texting on your device, texting your friends that on that same device that was created by people who went to school, right? Such a waste of time, such a waste of time. And it didn't occur to you. Of course it didn't, because you and I, we all have a narrative that we live by, an internal narrative that we create, that we live by. And we still have those. We still have those narratives. You still have those narratives that you kind of create and that you live by those narratives. And here are some of the things that we tell ourselves, right? Just to make sure that we're going in the right direction. I got a bunch of them we're just going to walk through really quick just to make sure that we're all going in the right direction today, right? I deserve better. I deserve better. I'm entitled to that. That should be mine, right? I should be further along, right? I should just be further along. I'm 28, I'm 30, I should be further along. He should be, right? I'm not happy, right? She should love me, right? If she loved me, then, right? If she loved me, they don't care, right? Those people, they don't care. What about this? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter my idea. It's not going to matter. It's not going to make any difference, right? It won't make any difference. I don't do exercise. You should exercise. No, I don't do exercise. I know, but that's why you should do it. But no, you don't understand. Look, it's not like, so you won't do it? No, I don't do it. What does that mean? I know it doesn't make any sense, but it's my story and I'm sticking with it, right? I don't do exercise. I can't. I'm better than them. Those people over there, I'm better than them, They're losers, right? They're all losers. I shouldn't consider them in this category. Those people over those categories, they're losers. They don't deserve, right? If they would try harder, you know what their problem is? You know what the problem? If they would just try harder, that's the problem. They just don't try hard enough. They don't try hard enough. I can't resist. Why do you do? I don't know. I just can't resist. I just can't resist. Something's wrong with me. Okay, that might actually be true, right? I can't live without. I can't live without. Republicans are all. Democrats are just. Men. That's actually true, okay? I'm just going to say that's true. Women are all Baptist. Catholics, the Catholics, right? If my mom hadn't techies, Oaklanders, right? Southerners, redneck, guns, those Southerners, right? We all have these narratives that we create. And if you look at this stuff, a lot of it doesn't really make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense, but these are the narratives that we create and we abide by and we live by these narratives, and it shapes everything. It shapes our decisions, that eventually shapes our habits, and it eventually becomes a rhythm in our life that we look back like, whoa, I never thought I would be here, right? Narratives create excuses, don't they? Right? They create excuses. And when you have an excuse, what do you have? You have a justification. You have justification, and you can justify just about anything and everything, right? Our internal narratives. This is a big deal. Our internal narratives. It impacts us, and it empowers us to avoid things that we should not avoid. It also empowers us to embrace things that we should stay away from. Narratives. In fact, narratives fuel. Don't miss this. Narratives fuel your fears. Your internal narratives, they not only fuel your fears, they fuel your prejudices. They fuel your racism, your pride, and perhaps even worst of all, narratives, it blinds us. It blinds us from our interdependency upon one another. Narratives are very, very difficult to overcome. They're very difficult to overcome. And here's why. Because like you and like me, my narrative and your narrative that we tell ourselves, that we try to sell ourselves on, the narratives that we tell ourselves, they're all shaped by things that we have no control over. Right? For instance, our narratives are shaped by where we are in the world. Right? This is why when you watch the news or when you go to your mobile device and your iPhone, because if you don't have an iPhone, something's wrong with your narrative, okay? But on your mobile device, and you're scanning through on Twitter, you're just scrolling up and down on Twitter, and you look at the news or wherever platform you get your news from, and you look at the news and you look at the part of the world and you say, what's wrong with them? What's wrong with them? Just knock it off, right? If they would just try harder, I mean, what's wrong with them in that part of the world? If they just fix that, I mean, they just need to try harder. What's wrong with them? Or it also shapes not just the way we live in the world, but also the way how we experience the world, right? Because the person behind you and the person next to you experience the world differently than you do. The person that you're driving on the highway, that you're working with in your workspace, that you live with your roommate. You live in the same city, you work in the same place, but you all experience the world very differently. But also by the way we live or how we were raised in the world, right? Our successes, our failures, our family, our upbringing, our education, the part of the city that we live in, all of these things shape and impact your internal narratives. And the good news for us is that the Apostle Paul, who wrote majority of the New Testament, he has a piece of narrative that we're going to look at today. And I got to warn you, maybe this is not your thing, but he uses military terminology. And it's so appropriate because to tear down the walls of those narratives that we're facing, that we kind of put up to keep us in and keep people out, the narratives that we put up to keep people out and keep us in, those narratives, it's so appropriate that he uses this language because it's not a casual endeavor to tear down those walls. It's not casual. It's going to take some force and some labor to actually remove those narratives that you and I hold on to that shape our decisions, that shape our habits, that become rhythms. And the people that he's writing to in this part of the world, they believe some things that you and I would find repugnant. Like we would never, ever, like we would look at them and say, how could they ever believe that? And so he has his task, his hands cut out for him. In fact, this is some of the things that they actually believe. It says, people are property. This is what they believe. This had nothing to do with race, but everything to do with economics, right? This had everything to do with whether or not the Romans were going to come and kind of conquer their land and enslave 20% of their population. Might makes right, right? Whoever had the biggest guns and the biggest army made right. They set the rules. They set the standards. Might makes right. And whoever's right could be changed overnight. The gods determine the life of the individuals. That's just how it was. Whatever happens to that child, or to that woman, or to that village, the gods determine the faith of that individual. And that's why we would bow down and worship the gods and keep them on our sides as much as we can. And to gain favor with them, because the gods determine the life and the faith of the individuals. That was just their fate. So Paul has his work cut out for him. But I believe today that if he was here today, he would also have his work cut out for him. Because there's some things that you and I believe and subscribe to as Jesus followers. There's some things that you and I believe that are in contrast to what God has for the world. And God has for you and for the people around you. And so he uses this military language to describe and to give us some bearings of how to tear down these narratives. So this is where the story picks up. It says this: for though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. Again, military terminology. For though we live in the world and we do not wage war as the world does, literally this means we do not conduct our military campaigns like the world conduct their campaigns, right? And he goes on to say, for the weapons we fight with, are not the weapons of the world, right? The weapons that he's talking about, the weapons of the world. This is not like swords and shields, right? This is not like water guns and swords. No. This is bigger than that. These are like siege equipment that you roll up to a wall, that you kind of use to get over the wall, or catapult that you use to knock down a wall. These are enormous structures that he's talking about, not weapons of the world. On the contrary, the weapons that we fight with, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. Divine power to demolish strongholds. A stronghold, again, is these stone walls that is kind of set up to surround a palace or surround a city to protect people from coming in and going out. This enormous structures. And he says, well, Paul is saying, look, the weapons that we fight with, the weapons that we have, these weapons have the power to knock down the strongest and enormous of structures, of stone walls, to break them down. And if you're reading this, you're thinking, what is he talking about, right? Like, does this have anything to do with me? Like, I don't knock down stone walls. Like, I never do that. Like, we don't do that. He says, hold on, I'm getting to my point. And he says, we demolish arguments. We demolish arguments. What is he talking about? He's saying, look, the arguments, the narratives that you carry, that I carry, that the world carries, that people carry, that are harmful to one another, that are harmful to yourself, the narratives that you carry, he says that we demolish these arguments. This is our job. This is your job. This is a part of, if you're a follower of Jesus, or maybe you're going to become a follower of Jesus, this is what a part of following Jesus looks like. We demolish arguments, strongholds. In other words, we are to wage war on flawed conclusions based on false assumptions. That's it, right? We are to wage war on flawed conclusions based on false assumptions. Now, I just don't want to lose you, but remember, think back in middle school and high school, right? When your parents or grandparents, whoever raised you, was trying to get through to you, they were just trying to get through that wall of defense, right? They're laying there in bed at night and they're thinking, man, how can we get through to this kid? What can we do? What can we say? How can we get through to this kid, right? And they were faced with what? An impenetrable wall, a fortress of defense, right? That's what they were faced with. an impenetrable fortress of argumentation, right? That's who you were. That's who I was in high school. Our parents were just trying to get through to us, this wall that we put up, and they just could not push through and get through. And Paul is saying, don't you know that's what God is trying to do with you? Don't you know that's what your Heavenly Father is trying to do with you and with me? He's trying to push through, break through, press through to get through that wall of defense that we've created, that narrative that we created, that is based upon how we live and where we live and when we were raised in the world. He's trying to push through and break through and get through. He says we demolish arguments. And he uses a weird word, and pretension. He's talking about high things. He's talking about tall things. He's talking about we're coming against every high thing, every arrogant attitude that puffs us up to what's real or what's not real. He says we're coming against every pretension, every tall thing, every fortress, every towering conceit, presumptuous notions that we build that keep us in and keep people out. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. Again, very graphic, very violent language. And he goes on to say, we take captive. We take captive. It literally means this. We lead into captivity. Every thought. We lead into captivity every thought, right? We take prisoners of war, chained ankle to ankle, wrist to wrist, right? We take every thought captive. Why? To the obedient, and make it obedient to Christ. When Jesus was, and this is why it's so important, maybe I've not said this enough, but this is why it's so important. If you're a follower of Jesus, or if you're curious about Jesus, you should read the Gospels. Like you should, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because in the Gospels, it has a perspective and a worldview of what it looks like if people who follow Jesus actually follow Jesus, and how it could change the world, how the vision and values of God, of Jesus, could actually change the world, make your life better. We say this all the time. I say this all the time. Following Jesus makes you better at life and makes your life better. That's it. Following Jesus makes your life better, makes you better at life. And if you read the Gospels, it gives you a perspective of what that looks like to actually change the world. In fact, in a story that Jesus was talking with his disciples, Jesus was getting ready to be crucified, and things were speeding up really quickly. And Jesus was sitting down with his disciples, and Philip was there, and he was saying to them, he was kind of condensing everything, summarizing everything, and he says to Philip says to him, Lord, I know this is really important, but before you go, just do us a favor before you go. He said this, Lord, just show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. Just show us the Father. Just show us what God is like, and that will be enough for us. And Philip was exactly right. Because if we could see how God sees, we would be more inclined to do what God says. Amen. If you could see how God sees you, you would be more inclined to do what God says. If you could see what God sees and how God sees your friends and see the people around you, you would be more inclined to do what God says, to honor the people around you. And so Jesus smiles and looks at Philip. And what he says, like, all those, they should have walked out of the room. But by this point, it's kind of too late. Like, Jesus has already said some crazy things. And he says this, he says, Philip, don't you know me, Philip? And Philip was like, well, I know you. I want to know God. Show me what God is like. He says, don't you know me, Philip? Even after I have been among you for such a long time. And what he says next, it's an invitation for you and for me. He says this, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. He says, look, anyone has seen me, you've seen the Father. This was game-changing. This was life-giving. This was different. This was something brand new. And he says, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. What Jesus was saying is this, look, if you want to know what God is like, watch me. If you want to know what God is like, listen to me. If you want to know what God is like, follow me. If you want to know what God thinks about you, listen to me. If you want to know what God thinks about the people around you, listen to me. If you want to know what God thinks about the world, follow me. Because When you follow God, you'll see that you actually matter to God, regardless if you follow him or not. You'll see that you actually matter to God. But you'll also see that the you besides you matters to God. And if the you besides you matters to God, then the you matters to you, because the you besides you matters to God. And every story, every narrative, every person matters to God. And you'll see that when you follow Jesus, that being, and many here can attest to this, right? When you follow Jesus, being full of yourself leaves you empty. But when you follow him, and when you buy in, and when you serve, and when you make a difference, what you learn is this: emptying yourself will leave you full. That's why Jesus can say to his disciples, and say to the world, really, everyone who hears my words and puts them into practice, everyone who understands that their narrative could possibly be wrong, who understands this and put them into practice, not just listen, but actually puts them into practice and begin to do them, begin to repeat these habits, is like a wise man who built his house on a firm foundation, who built his house on a rock. On a rock. So, I have a question for you. And when I ask you this question, you'll be surprised that it won't have nothing to do with you, and you'll be so happy that it doesn't, right? But the question is this. Do you have any strongholds? Right? Do you have any strongholds that needs to be demolished? The answer to the question is yes. It is. Because I have strongholds. How judgmental of you to say that? No, it's true. No. Look, just like you, I have strongholds that needs to be torn down and demolished. Just because I have a mic up here and I do this every Sunday doesn't mean that I don't have any strongholds that need to be torn down. So do you have any strongholds that needs to be demolished? And I'm going to get ready to ask you a couple more questions. And these questions that I'm going to ask, okay, maybe they won't have anything, like for you, like they won't matter much. But maybe some other questions that I'll ask later on, it hits you right between the eyes. And I'm asking these questions because I want you, and I want me, I want us to think about the narrative that pops into our mind when we see these questions, when we hear these questions. I want you to think about that. And this is really important. I'm not saying that your narrative is right or wrong. I'm not at all. But what I am saying is that I'm just saying that, look, when those narratives pops into your mind, you can ask yourself, oh, yeah, that's true. Why do I think that way? Why do I act that way? Why do I respond that way? Why do I do that? And so that you can be just aware, and I can be aware of our internal narratives. So I want you to think about the narrative behind some of these questions. Okay? Why don't you call your brother? Why don't you call your older sister? Why don't you call your mother? And for some of you, why don't you call your eldest son? Why do you drink so much? Why do you respond the way you respond when somebody points out that maybe you drink too much? Because you have a narrative. I have a narrative. We all have narratives that we live by. What do you tell yourself? Okay. What do you tell yourself about why you aren't more generous with your money? What do you tell yourself about why you don't pay your taxes? What do you tell yourself about why you gave up on God or gave up on the church? And have you listened to that narrative lately? And what happens? what happens? What happens when your narrative and my narrative, what happens to our narratives when we hold it up to this? For God so loved the world. For God so loved you. For God so loved the you beside you that he gave his only son. Do they feel kind of small? Do they feel kind of petty? Mine does. Do they feel kind of insignificant? You see, because the narratives that we hold onto that's holding us back, right? The narratives that we hold onto that's holding us back, that's keeping us in and keeping people out. It doesn't matter your color, your creed. If it's against somebody that honors God and honors people, look, you should let go of those narratives. You should put them down. You should walk away from them. You should put them down, because here's the thing, because it doesn't matter your color, your creed. We should hold on to narratives and demolish anything that doesn't honor God and honors people. So I have an idea. It's just an idea. It's not my idea. It's Paul's idea. I stole it from him. Let's demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and take captive every thought and make it obedient to Jesus. So I mentioned this last week. I had a habit, not just a habit, pay attention to your attention, but also a commitment. I want a commitment for you this week as well. And the commitment is this: I will demolish every narrative that conflicts with the value system of Jesus. I will demolish every narrative that conflicts with the value system and the vision that Jesus has for this world. And if you're any bit confused about the vision, let me tell you what, that vision is life-giving. It's liberating. It's freeing. It's freeing for you. It's freeing for the people around you. It's freeing for your friends and family. It's freeing for your workplace. Look, it's a value system that doesn't just change you. It changes the world. It changes everything around you. It changes everything you touch and impact. It changes your sphere of influence. It changes your impact. It takes it further, faster. It goes beyond you. It goes beyond me. It goes beyond us. It goes beyond this world. It goes into eternity. So let me encourage you to demolish any narrative that conflicts God and people, that hurts the person next to you and hurts you and hurts the you behind you and hurts the you that you're raising and hurts the you that you live with and hurts the you that you work with and the you that even do anything for you. So let me pray for you.